All right. Thank you, brothers and sisters. My name is David G. I am a grateful, recovering alcoholic and a lustaholic. I have a sobriety date in Alcoholics Anonymous of August the 8th of 1994. I have a sobriety date in SA of October 1st of 2019. I'm really grateful to be here today. I'm grateful to be able to do this study. I want to thank each of you, brothers and sisters, for your participation here. And just thank you so much, Dennis, for hosting and doing all that you do. The last few weeks, we have been looking pretty in depth at the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous and the message contained within. We looked at the history the first couple of weeks, and as we moved through that, we've seen how the fellowship formed. At one time, it was almost a 75% recovery rate. We, from there, moved into the doctor's opinion. We learned that our body was as sick as our mind, according to this doctor. That brought on a lot of intrigue as we began to look physically at what was wrong with us as well as mentally. Last week, we took an inside look at Bill's story. We looked at, his life. We looked at the disease and how it progressed in him. We looked at how he met his friend, Ebby Thatcher, how he bottomed out. Sitting at the kitchen table, he took step 2. He went back to the town's hospital and worked steps 3 through 12 and recovered. And Bill's story is an inspiration to anyone that is seeking this way of life. This week, we're going to be taking a look at chapter 2 in the big book. There is a solution contained on page 17 of the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. And I like to remember the title. There is a solution. There are a lot of things that I tried prior to coming to AA and a lot of things I tried prior to coming to SA to find the solution to my problem. I tried religion, I tried therapy, I tried different religions, more therapy. Not that those things were not helpful. I'm not saying that at all. I just know that each time I continued to go back and relapse over and over and over. I began to take a look at, was my problem really therapeutic or was it spiritual? And as I got into there is a solution, I began to understand that my problem was spiritual, but then the answer was as well. So with that being said, this week I would just like to open up with there is a solution. Take a look at what Bill writes. He's going to give us a promise right here in the very first short paragraph that should be good for everyone. I think we can all agree. He said, we of Alcoholics Anonymous know thousands of men and women who were once just as hopeless as Bill. For me, that becomes a question because I need to ask myself, do I fit in this category of those thousands of men and women who were once just as hopeless as Bill? And I know as I look at that, was my life the same as Bill? Did I drink the way he did? Did I do all of these things? No. But as I looked at what surrounded that, the loneliness, the isolation, I looked at all of that thing, I began to realize that once I put alcohol away, once I tried to not act out anymore, it seemed like that's when the problem began. In Alcoholics Anonymous, they always say, if drinking's your problem, you're probably not an alcoholic. Because if drinking's your problem, the only thing you need to do is not drink, and you shouldn't have a problem anymore. The problem should be removed. But if you stop drinking and something else shows up and drives you insane until you do drink again, then that is your real problem. And I found that to be true in SA as well. If acting out is my problem, the only thing I need to do is not act out. The question is, how do I not do that anymore? Because every time I stop, the obsession returns. I believe the lie. I take action. I act out once more. And I find myself in that hopeless state that happened to Bill over and over and over. So the book says we know thousands of men and women who were once just as hopeless as Bill. Nearly all have recovered. They have solved the drink problem. And for me, there's 2 promises contained in that sentence. One, nearly all have recovered. Anytime I see the word recovered in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, for me, that is a promise. They have solved the drink problem. For a lot of us that have been around here for a long time, we have solved the lust problem. There couldn't be any greater promise given this than that right there. I think that is the whole program. Anytime that I've ever talked with a new man, I've worked with a newcomer, I've worked with his family, this is the first thing they want to know. What is the solution and how do we get it? How do we solve this problem? He says, we are average Americans, all sections of this country, and many of its occupations are represented, as well as many political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. We are people who normally would not mix. And you take a look at some of us in the fellowship. Some of us are plumbers. Some of us are truck drivers. Some of us are lawyers and judges and dentists. I mean, we are people who have all kinds of different personalities. We are people who normally would not mix. But when we come into this program, we're all on the same level playing field then. There is something in us that makes us the same. And so he says, but there exists among us a fellowship, a friendliness, and an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. And anybody that has come to this program who has spent very much time in the fellowship knows that indescribable, that wonderful love that we feel from each other as we unify here to overcome this disease. I know that the fellowship is a very, very important part of my recovery. I absolutely love it. But I also know this, that if I solely depend on the fellowship, chances are I'm going to relapse again. The book is going to tell me that as well. I need you. I have to have you. I have to. But if I don't have this experience that the book is going to tell us about here, if I don't have that experience, then it doesn't matter whether I come to this fellowship or not. I'm going to continue to suffer from a hopeless state of mind and body, and I will relapse over and over and over. That's just not because what I've read in this book. That has been my experience over and over through the years. He says, we're like passengers of a great liner the moment after rescue, from shipwreck to camaraderie. Joyness and democracy pervade the vessel from steerage to captain's table. Unlike the feelings of the ship's passenger, however, our joy and escape from disaster, there's another promise for us. Escape from disaster. Man, what a beautiful promise for the sexaholic, for the alcoholic. It does not subside as we go our individual ways. The feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement which binds us, but that in itself would have never held us together as we are now joined. I like to look at that as a warning, because the book is warning me right here that if I solely rely on the fellowship, that I'm not going to make it. And all we need to do is just back up about 2 or 3 sentences there and take a look at that a little more in depth, and we'll be able to see exactly what they're talking about. The feeling of having shared in a common peril, that's what you and I do when we come here. We share in a common peril. When we come into the fellowship, we sit around the rooms, we share that peril with each other. But look at the next 3 words. It's one element. It's only one. There's 3 parts to this deal, not 1, not 2, but 3. This is one element in the powerful cement which binds us. So I want to pay very close attention to what he's going to say right here in this next sentence. But that in itself would have never held us together as we are now joined. The fellowship is a beautiful thing. I love you guys. But if I'm staking my life on that and nothing else, I'm not going to make it. But here's some good news. The tremendous fact, not theory, fact, for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. We have a way out. What a promise. We have a way out. I'm interested, on which we can absolutely agree and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. That's the great news this book, not this fellowship, but this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. So I'm interested. I'm interested for sure. I've got to have the fellowship, but I know today that that won't hold me. It's telling me the great news is I have a way out. It's contained inside of this book. So it's my job at this point to go get it. So let's take a look at top of page 18. He says an illness of this sort, and I've heard this discussed many times through the years, it really doesn't make any difference to me whether it's called a disease, whether it's called this, whether it's called that. I don't really care what it is. I know I have it today. But my book calls it an illness. An illness of this sort, and we have come to believe it an illness, involves those about us in a way that no other human sickness can. If a person has cancer, all are sorry for him, and no one is angry or hurt. I had a cousin. He was 47 years old when he was diagnosed with liver cancer, and it was a horrible time. He died at a very early age. He fought it for a few years, and it just took him downhill and eventually took him out. Everybody felt sorry for him. But looking at that in my own life, I suffer from an illness similar to his. Whenever it comes to lust, whenever it comes to sex, when it comes to alcohol, drugs, all of that stuff. But that was not the response that I got when I bottomed out a year ago and whenever I came back to SA. That was not it, where it says no one was angry or hurt. Everybody was angry and hurt. Everybody, and rightfully so. But the book says, not so with the alcoholic illness, for with it there goes annihilation of all things worthwhile in life. And think about that in our disease. Everything worthwhile in my life was gone. I had been the founder of a group that started in 2007. It was one of the strongest recovery groups in Southeast Oklahoma. We studied the big book, the steps, the traditions, the concepts. We were into recovery. But because of lust, not being able to ever get on the other side of that, every bit of that was destroyed. My wife will not even go back to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting today because of some of the things that happened. It just destroyed everything worthwhile in life. It says it engulfs all whose life touched the sufferer. I think about the word engulfs. It engulfs. It's like a fire. It just engulfs all whose lives touched the sufferers. Look at these questions. Let's break them down one at a time and take a look at them in our own life, and look at it, if you would, from your disease. When this was going on with you, did this happen? It brings misunderstanding. A question I would stop and pause. Absolutely. Did it bring fierce resentment? What about financial insecurity? Disgusted friends? My wife or my family, my children? What about employers? Warped lives of blameless children? Sad wives, parents? Anyone can increase this list. Man, and I even experienced this sober from alcohol and drugs. For 25 years, lust was hidden in the background. And all those years sober, all of those years speaking on the circuit, doing these book studies, doing all of these things, and lust was hidden in the background. I heard somebody had mentioned to me a little while back, when drugs and alcohol are gone, that's the day recovery from lust begins. I beg to differ with that. I do, because I've been sober for a long time in that program, but lust was never gone, and recovery from that did not start for me until almost a year ago. The book says, we hope that this volume will inform and comfort those who are or those who may be affected. I need to really ask myself that question. Am I one of those who are or who may be affected here? The answer is absolutely yes, not based on my knowledge or anything I read from this book, but as I look back at my experience, and I'm sure many of you can say the same, that's absolutely true. The book says they are many. Highly competent psychiatrists who have dealt with us found it sometimes impossible to persuade an alcoholic to discuss this situation without reserve. Strangely enough, wives, parents, and intimate friends usually find us even more unapproachable than do the psychiatrist and the doctor. So one of the questions that was asked a little while back, I had read something that said, where is sponsorship contained in the solution pages in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous? Well, this next paragraph is going to tell me how to be a sponsor whenever I come into this fellowship. If I want to know how to be one, and if I want to know how to find one, then I'm going to look real closely at these next two paragraphs, because it's going to give me a bird's eye view of exactly what that looks like. Let's look at how to be a sponsor. But the ex-problem drinker, there's a promise, ex-problem drinker, who has found this solution, not some other solution, this solution contained inside of these pages of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, who is properly armed with the facts about himself, not about myself, but about himself. I used to hear people just do that in meetings all the time. Their sponsors would tell them, call me 3 times a day, find a job, do this, go to bed at this time, get up at this time. They would go through all these things. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I don't read any of that here. So he needs to be armed with the facts about himself, not myself. And he can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. And I've witnessed that over and over and over. So that's how I want to be if I'm going to be one. I want to have the facts about myself. I want to have this message. I want to be able to transmit something that I have rather than something I don't. I want to look now at this next paragraph on how to find a sponsor. So anybody that comes in that is looking for a sponsor, I think I heard a man say earlier, he was looking for a sponsor. And this is kind of what we want to look for in that man, or this is kind of what I want to look for. in this man. That the man who is making the approach has had the same difficulty. Now that's a strange sentence, because a lot of the meetings that I went to in the beginning, they would say things like, if that man is serious about his recovery and he needs a sponsor, he'll come to me. If his recovery means anything to him at all, he will come to me. But my book doesn't say that. Right here in the very first sentence of this paragraph, it tells me who's going to be making the approach. The man who is making the approach, and that would be me, has had the same difficulty. That he obviously knows what he's talking about. His whole deportment, in other words, his whole behavior, shouts at the new prospect that he is the man with a real answer. He has no attitude of holier than thou, nothing whatever except for the sincere desire to be helpful. That there are no fees to pay, axes to grind, people to please, lectures to be endured. These are the conditions we have found most effective. Not all of that other stuff that was mentioned before that I talked about. You know, and I understand that most people, they have good intentions whenever they work with somebody here. I just know from my experience, if it is not this solution that is being given, is something, a watered down version of it. And I've seen that to be very destructive in a lot of people's lives. There was no time in our group, he used to say years and years ago, pray you fall into the hands of the right person whenever you come here. And today I believe that is true. Look at this promise. After such an approach, many take up their beds and walk again. Now, none of us makes a sole vocation of this work. And for me, that's what the process of this book is. It's this work. Nor do we think its effectiveness would be increased if it did. It's really not going to be any more effective for me to take you through this than for you to read this yourself and do exactly what it says. The problem is with people like me and people that I know like me, we don't really read this way. We just read through it and we just keep going and we get up there to the parts that sound really good, but there's so much that we miss back here that it can be very fatal for some of us. So we're not going to make a sole vocation of this, and we don't think it would be that much more effective if we did. But look at this. He says, we feel that elimination of our drinking, of our acting out, of our lusting is but a beginning. That's a warning for me. That's a warning. That's just the beginning. That's not the end. That's the beginning. A much more important demonstration of our principles, these 12 steps. And I never knew how to do that for a long time. I didn't understand how to demonstrate these principles, practice them. But he says that they lie before us in our respective homes, occupations, and affairs. I always wanted to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. I always wanted to go to Sexaholics Anonymous. I wanted to speak in the meeting. I wanted to do all these things. But there's another 23 hours outside of that day that I need to learn how to practice the principles that are given, that are contained in this book. And I just really didn't know how to do that, to be honest. It said all of us spend much of our spare time. Man, I had to stop and take a close look at that one, because I was spending all of my time trying to work with other people. I would have 10 or 12 or 13 people that I was trying to work with, and it was just going nowhere. My family was getting put on the back burner. My job was suffering because of it. I was speaking at conferences. I can remember in November of 2018, I never seen my house one time the whole month, because between work and speaking at conferences and doing big book studies, I was gone the whole month. Not very good for someone like me. Because although I was gone and I was doing all that stuff in recovery and AA, lust was very present the whole time. So it says all of us are going to spend much of our spare time in the sort of effort that we're going to describe. A few are fortunate enough to be so situated that they can give nearly all of their time to the work. I have a friend that suffers from MS here in Oklahoma, and this guy has the opportunity to work with hundreds of people just all the time through this book. It's a very beautiful thing. I'm kind of envious of that from time to time. But, he can give all of his time to the work. And a lot of people's life has been blessed because of that. He says, if we keep on the way we are going, there's little doubt that much good will result. But the surface of the problem would hardly be scratched. And as we move on in this book, in the next weeks ahead, we're going to see that our problem is not lust. It's not alcohol. It's not drugs. It's not any of those things. And see, I didn't even realize that. And he gives me an early a look at that right here, the surface of the problem would hardly be scratched. Those of us who live in large cities are overcome by the reflection that close by hundreds are dropping into oblivion every day. Think about that in SA. Think about that in AA. People are dropping into oblivion after coming into our fellowship. Over and over and over, we see relapse. So even inside of the rooms, that sentence applies. Close by hundreds are dropping into oblivion every day. But look what he tells me I can do here. Many could recover if they have been given the opportunity we have enjoyed. What is that opportunity? The opportunity to go through this book, work these steps, conscious contact with God, with my sponsor, with you brothers. Many would recover if they had that opportunity. So if that opportunity is available, then how shall we present that what has been given, so freely given us? We have concluded to publish an anonymous volume setting forth the problem as we see it. That's step one. We shall bring to the test our combined experience and knowledge. And we're going to see that in chapters 2 here and 3. This should suggest a useful program. We're going to see that in chapters 5, 6, and 7 for anyone concerned with a drinking problem, a lusting problem, an acting out problem. Of necessity, there will have medical, psychiatric, social, and religious. Now, we are aware that these matters are, from their very nature, controversial. Nothing would please us so much as to write a book which would contain no basis for contention or argument. We shall do our utmost to achieve that ideal. Most of us, you and I included, sense that real tolerance of other people's shortcomings and viewpoint and respect for their opinions and attitudes are which makes us more useful to others. Now, that's never really been my life until I was beaten to the bottom and I come back into this fellowship with a completely new attitude and a different way to take a look at life and my brothers and everything about it. Their shortcomings, their viewpoints, their attitudes, their opinion, all of that stuff, it never really mattered to me before. I was only concerned with myself, although I was the last one to know that. Everybody could see that but me. Look at this promise. Our very lives as X problem. Anytime I see X problem, that's a promise. X problem drinker, X problem lusters, X problem people who are acting out. Our very lives as that depend upon our constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs. So there is a condition, and that's what it is. So if you're like me, you've probably asked yourself this question many times prior to coming here and then probably after you got here. You may have already asked yourself why it is that all of us became so very ill from drinking, from acting out, from lusting, whatever it is that we're doing. Why did I get so sick? I never meant for it to start out that way. I never meant for it to end that way. I never meant for all of this to happen. How did I become so very ill from this? The book says, doubtless, you are curious to discover how and why, in the face of expert opinion to the contrary. Look at this promise. We have recovered from a hopeless condition of mind and body. Not from alcohol, not from drugs, not from acting out, not from lust. We have recovered from a hopeless condition of mind and body. Now, if you are an alcoholic, sexaholic, lustaholic, that's a question for me. I need to ponder that pretty closely as I'm moving through this book with a sponsor. If you are that, who wants to get over it, that's a very serious question for most people that I sponsor. That's the first thing that we need to look at. Do you really want to go over this, and are you willing to go to any lengths to do it? The book says you may be already asking, what do I have to do? And that was exactly my question when I came here. You tell me what I have to do, and I promise you this time I'm willing to do it. And so it has been ever since. But look how he answers it. He said it's the purpose of this book to answer such questions specifically, emphasizing this book. We shall tell you what we have done. Before going into a detailed discussion, it may be well to summarize some points as we see them. How many times have people said to us, I can take it or leave it alone? If you're an alcoholic, a drug addict, a sexaholic, a lustaholic, whatever it is, and you're like me, I can't take it or leave it alone. Either one. I convince myself that I can take it, but it always turns out that I can't, and I can never leave it alone. But those people, can take it or leave it alone. Why can't he? So why don't you drink like a gentleman or quit? I don't think I've ever been able to lust like a gentleman. I think I've tried some, but I don't think that I've ever been able to do that. That fellow can't handle his liquor. Why don't you try beer, wine, lay off the hard stuff? His willpower must be weak. In other words, that's referring to a choice that somehow I think I have when I come here. I think I have a choice whether I do this or whether I don't. But what I'm fixing to see in the next few pages is I lost the power to choose. I don't have that choice anymore. And I don't know when it went away. I just know that it went away, and I do know that I've never got it back. Says he could stop if he wanted to. She's such a sweet girl. I should think he'd stop for her sake. I promise you that would have been every reason in the world for me to stop doing what I was doing. My wife, I have a beautiful granddaughter. One of the questions that my sponsor would always have me ask myself whenever I would have another bout with the internet one more time. Would you do this if your wife or your granddaughter were here? Absolutely not. Of course I would. And he said, well, you need to think of this every time before you do that. But you know what? I have a mind that's not going to let me think of that. I'm not going to be able to see that. The only thing that I'm going to be able to see is what I'm looking to see at the time. And he would tell me things like, no secrets, David. He'd say, if you want to run around on your wife, that's fine. You just need to okay it with her before you do. I said, no, we're not doing that. He said, if you want to get on the internet, you want to do those things, that's fine. Just invite your grandkids to come on out and watch with you. He said, you see, it's not so much what you do, it's the secrets you keep behind what you do that keep you sick. You don't want anybody to know you do these things in the dark. And I know that he's right, but I also know that I could not stop. I didn't have a choice. The doctor told him that if he ever drank again, it would kill him, but there he is all lit up again. Now, these are commonplace observations on drinkers and lusters and all this that we hear all the time. I even hear it in the rooms. But the back of them is a world of ignorance and misunderstanding. We see that these expressions refer to people whose reactions to alcohol, lust, and all these other things are very different from ours. One of the things that my wife would tell me after discovery had taken place was, if you loved me, you would have never done that. And nothing could be farther from the truth, because I loved her with all my heart more than anything. If love would have cured my condition, the day my children were born, that condition would have been gone, because I loved them more than I loved anything. The day that I married her, that condition would have been gone, because I loved her more than anything. This disease is more powerful than love as I know it. And the only thing that I have ever found that will bring permanent relief and recovery are the 12 steps and an experience with a loving God that I found today. Moderate drinkers. We're going to take a look at 3 different types of people. And I want to look at this, and I want to see if I can identify, because a lot of people will skip right over to the real alcoholic or the real sexaholic and say, oh, yeah, that's me, and forget the other 2. But I want to look at these other 2, and I want to see, did any of this happen through the years that I was progressing with this illness? Moderate drinkers have little trouble in giving up liquor, lust, whatever, entirely if they have a good reason for it. I've had a good reason for it on many, many occasions, but I've never been able to do it. They can take it or they can leave it alone. In other words, they have a choice whether they do this or not. Number 2, then we have a certain type of hard drinker. He may have the habit badly enough to gradually impair him mentally and physically. And it may not, but it may cause him to die a few years before his time. If a sufficiently strong reason, look at these questions one at a time. Ill health, has that ever been able to stop me in my disease? What about falling in love? Change of environment? What about the warning of a doctor? Becomes operative. This man can also stop or moderate. Some people walk away from that after those experiences and they never return to that. And I'm grateful that they do. I've just never been able to do that. The book says, although he may find it difficult and troublesome, and he may even need medical attention. Now, why is it that a man, let me look at this from my alcoholic point of view. Why is it that a man can drink for 30 years as hard as I did, and one day he's able to stop and walk away from it and never come back? And I continued to struggle with it and to the point of death. Why is that? What's different between he and I? You know, I take a look at this. I had an uncle, and they called him Sidewalk Jack. And this guy drank until he was just, I mean, he was the worst drunk I think I'd ever seen in my life. And he was so drunk that at times sores would pop out on his face. I mean, he was just bad. And one day he decided he was going to quit. He got up and he walked away, and he never come back ever again. And I really didn't understand that for a long time until I read about the third type of alcoholic that we're going to look at here in the next paragraph. But I never really understood why Jack was able to do that. But I do today. The book says, what about the real alcoholic? Now, he may not, but he may start off as a moderate drinker. He may or he may not become a continuous hard drinker. But I think right here is the key to it. But at some stage of his drinking career, of his lusting career, of his acting out career, he begins to lose all control of the consumption once he starts. Not after he's been drunk for a few days, not after he's acted out for a week or he's been on a binge for a month. Once he starts. Now, we know from studying the other chapters in this book prior to getting to this chapter, that's because of the physical allergy. Once we start, we are unable to stop. And that's what we see. That's what I seen between me and Jack. Jack didn't have the allergy. For whatever reason, he didn't have it. I did. He could stop, and I couldn't. The book said, here is the fellow who has been puzzling you, especially in his lack of control. He does absurd, incredible, and tragic things while drinking. Think of that with our lusting. My God, the incredible, tragic things that I did. I mean, I set myself up for failure over and over and over with that. He's a real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I find myself that way even sober at times. He is seldom mildly intoxicated. He is always more or less insanely drunk. Look up the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It is known that he died from alcoholism. So I think that may be why it was put here. It said he's seldom mildly intoxicated. He is always more or less insanely drunk. His disposition while drinking resembles his normal nature but little. He may not, but he may be one of the finest fellows in the world. See, that doesn't matter. Moral character doesn't matter at all here. Yet let him drink for a day, not a week, not a month, a day. And he frequently becomes disgustingly and even dangerously anti-sober. And I have seen that with people, even sober, suffering from the obsession of the mind. He has a positive genius for getting tight at exactly the wrong moment, particularly when some important decision must be made or engagement kept. I don't know how many times I've missed birthdays, anniversaries, all this stuff. I would come up with the excuse that I had to work. I was an oil in the gas man. I'd be out on the road and I would be gone. That's a perfect opportunity for me to lust and act out. I would stay gone, and I would always get tight at exactly the wrong moment. It says he's often perfectly sensible and well-balanced concerning everything except liquor. Now, I would like to think of myself that way, but that's probably not the truth. But in that respect, he's incredibly dishonest and selfish. He often possesses special abilities, skills, and aptitudes, has a promising career ahead of him. He uses those gifts to build up a bright outlook for his family and himself. Then he pulls down the structure on his head by a senseless series of sprees. Anybody ever do that with lust? Anybody ever do that with alcohol? Over and over and over. I find myself in that sentence. When I'm reading this book in this way, I see me over and over and over all the way through it. Here's the fellow who goes to bed so intoxicated he ought to sleep the clock around. Yet early the next morning, he searches madly for the bottle he misplaced the night before. I can remember being so drunk in my disease of alcoholism in my early days. And I can remember that I had a pint, and it was on Sunday, and I knew that I needed that to make it through Sunday until Monday morning, because in Oklahoma, liquor is not sold on Sunday unless you get it from a bootlegger. And I'd searched everywhere, up and down. I mean, tore the house completely apart looking for that pint and couldn't find it. And so I was pretty upset. So finally I thought, well, I'm going to cook some eggs. I need to eat some. I hadn't eaten in a week, and had no gas in the house, no running water, any of that stuff. But I had an electric skillet, and we had some electricity, so I plugged that electric skillet in to get it hot, and I smelled something, smoke coming out from underneath it. And as I lift the lid on that, there was my pint that I'd put inside of there. I searched madly for the bottle, and I finally found it. Man, what a great day it was from there. You know, the eggs were out, and the liquor was in, and it's just insane at the things that we do. It says if he can afford it, he may have liquor concealed all over his house to be certain no one gets his entire supply away from him to throw down the waste pipe. I do that with social media too. You know, I will find myself, I may get rid of this, but I'm keeping this. And that's not good for me at all. As matters grow worse, he begins to use a combination of high-power sedatives and liquor to quiet his nerves so that he can go to work. Then comes the day when he simply cannot make it, and he gets drunk, or he acts out all over again. Perhaps he goes to a doctor who gives him morphine or some sedative with which to taper off. Then he begins to appear in hospital and sanitariums, meetings, jailhouses, etc. The list could go on and on and on. So let's take a look. Let's drop down to the bottom paragraph, and let's take a look at this, what he says. Perhaps there will never be a full answer to some of these questions the way that we were looking at them there a while ago. Opinions vary considerably as why the alcoholic or the sexaholic reacts differently from normal people. We're not sure why. We know once a certain point is reached, and if I want to read a little bit more, study a little bit more about the certain point that is reached, I can find that on page 24, page 38, and page 58. Little can be done for him. We cannot answer the riddle. But look at this, and this is something that I never want to forget right here. Whether I'm in AA, whether I'm in NA, whether I'm in SA, whatever A I'm in, I always want to remember this right here. We are equally positive that once, not after a couple of days on a binge, none of that, once I take any alcohol, any lust, any of that, whatever, into my system, something happens. I need to ask myself that question. Does something happen to me every time that I do that? My experience shows yes, both in the bodily and mentally sense, not just the mental, the body as well, which makes it virtually impossible for me to stop. And I need to look at my experience, and I need to ask myself that question. Anytime that I put that into my system, does something happen that makes it virtually impossible for me to stop using, drinking, acting out, lusting, whatever it is? The experience of any alcoholic, any sexaholic will abundantly confirm this. So from right here in this point of the book, we have looked at the physical allergy as far as we're going to go with it. We're not going to look at the physical allergy anymore. When we take a look at step one, and we look at it, we admitted that we were powerless over alcohol. We admitted that we were powerless over lust, that our lives have become unmanageable. That sounds like there's two parts to that step. Powerless over lust. Our lives become unmanageable, two parts. But we're going to see through the book in this study in the next few weeks coming up that we're powerless for two reasons, not one. That unmanageability is a completely separate issue. So we're going to look at three parts to step one. We've looked at the first one these weeks up to this point with the physical allergy, the physical condition that's what's wrong with us. From this point on in the book, we're going to look at what sets us up for relapse. And as alcoholics and as sexaholics, I need to know what this is because I'm doing good. I'm coming home. I'm loving my wife. I'm doing all of these things. And one day, boom, lust returns and I have no defense against it. And I'm gone again. And I can't understand why, because I meant with all of my heart that I wanted to stop. I prayed. I did everything that I was told to do. And I relapsed again and again and again. Well, over the next few weeks, we're going to be taking a real close look at what happens inside of the mind prior to the relapse. We also know that once we act out physically, act out in any way, or once if we're an alcoholic, we put any of it into our body, that triggers the physical allergy. Look what he says, and then we'll stop right here. These observations, in other words, everything that we have observed in these prior 22 pages would be academic and pointless. It wouldn't even matter if our friend David, whoever, never took the first drink, because we will never trigger the physical allergy. It's just not possible. Thereby setting that terrible cycle into motion. Therefore, the main problem, the alcoholic, the sexaholic, is centers in his mind, not his body. Once I take it out of my body, the problem has showed up, the mind. And that's what I need to be focused on in my recovery moving forward from now on. What goes on in the mind prior to me taking the first drink, the first lust drink, acting out, on and on and on. I think that'd probably be a good place to stop for this week. And I really appreciate you brothers and sisters coming out. I just want to say that this is my experience in the big book as I've learned it. I'm not an expert on anything, nothing medical, psychiatric, any of that. Anything I've said here today is my experience. If it does not line up with what your sponsor has showed you or told you about this book, as I always say, your sponsor is right. Because, for me, I want to study. I want to be able to relate. I want to be able to have the experience. And I want to be able to precisely do what they've done so that I can recover from a hopeless state of mind and body. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Dennis. And thank you guys so much for allowing me to share.